Hey friends, welcome back. A little bit of context before I hop out into the sun over here. I'm in North Carolina today, and I want to talk about the food forest that I started establishing here. I guess I started in 2022. I was going to say 2021, but I think 2022 is when I got down here to my grandparents' farm and started putting plants in the ground. And at the time of me filming this, it's early May 2025. It has been a long time since I've been down to this site. That wasn't planned. That's just the way it goes. The way it went this year is there's just been so much. There still is so much going on up in Virginia. I've had a hard time making it down here. So I feel like I've neglected this food forest a little bit, but neglect is probably not exactly the right word because most of these plants are established enough now that they're doing fine on their own. It looks a little bit more overgrown than I would like it, but most of the plants are looking pretty decent, all things considered. There's two main things that I missed doing that I wish I could have done, but I've been, like I said, I've just been busy. Ideally, I would have spread some more mulch and compost around some of these plants over the winter or late fall, early spring. During the dormant season, it would have been nice to get some more mulch down and some compost. We have mulch, we have piles of wood chips, and I have some compost here I could have used. Like I said, just didn't have the time to get down here and do it. It would have been ideal for the plants, but they're all doing pretty good anyway, as I'll show you here in a second. The other thing is, I wish that earlier in the season I could have gotten ahead or at least kept up with maintaining my pathways and mowing around some of my fence lines. It's not the end of the world that things have grown up a little bit, but it's harder to maintain them with just a weed whacker as my main tool. You know, as it goes with weed whacking, I'm going to step out into the sun and start actually doing this video. With the weed whacker, the taller things get, the thicker they get, the woodier they get, the more difficult they become to manage. Now, I've put out a lot of videos about this food forest project, about this site over the past few years. And so if you've seen any of those, you'll know things are generally pretty dense, pretty chaotic, pretty overgrown. I didn't really have a specific plan when I started this food forest, and I was on a very shoestring budget. So it's pretty much just plant what I could get access to, what I could grow myself. Luckily, I had a lot of friends donated plants from their propagation efforts, so there's a lot of cool stuff in here, but it's very, I don't know, all over the place. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I'm really fond of this project, of all these plants and the way it went, but I don't always approach things in this manner. I think it made sense this time. Anyway, let's flip the camera around, and I'll show you guys what we're looking at. Like I often say in these videos, it's going to be impossible to touch on every plant that's here, but this is a really cool little guild grouping that I started where we have elderberry. This elderberry is in its second year, I believe. Most of the plants here are either 2 or 3 years old. Flowering, where it looks like we're going to get a decent crop of berries off of this elderberry right now. We're in a little bit of a microclimate where when it rains, water rushes off this roof and this area gets very wet. It also does get some afternoon shade from the building. And I also have a ton of sunchokes in here. Now, I harvested this sunchoke patch very heavily last fall, and you can see they came back very strong. I also sort of established more sunchokes. I did plant some of the tubers. I want them to kind of push this way, now facing from the other direction. And you can see the remnants of last year's evening primrose. There are some evening primrose popping back up. That's what these guys are. They tend to act as more of a biennial in the landscape. So there's 3 members of the group of the guild. There's elderberry, sunchoke, Jerusalem artichoke, and evening primrose. Now there's also a black walnut seedling, hopefully somewhere still in here. I'm gonna dig around and see if we can find them. Y'all might have to just take my word for it, but she's in here. I could smell her. I could smell the walnut when I was pushing leaves aside. Here, deep in here, whoop, hold on. This is the walnut, the black walnut. Now you can see, right, little stem here. Very clearly getting smothered in this patch. Now, at this point in this food forest, like I said, I'm pretty hands-off. If I was down here more often, there'd be more choices I could make. I don't think that just because the black walnut's swamped out right now means that this is a fail. The sunchokes, the elderberries could easily take a little bit of cutting back to allow the walnut some sunlight, and it could grow up. Treat them as a chop and drop type of plant. I am going to leave this and see what happens. I think the walnut will likely struggle along, but eventually get up above these. We'll see what happens. It's going to be interesting. Turning around over here where most of the food forest has happened, one of the things that strikes me first off is that these black locusts are doing exactly what you would expect and shooting up toward the sky. This black locust is in its 3rd year, easily 12, 13 feet tall at this point. And again, and you know, talking establishment, successional layers, guilds, groups, all this sort of thing, there's another black locust here. There were some white oaks planted underneath of these, and the black locust is going to kind of be like a nurse tree for these white oaks. You can see the white oaks are still here, chugging along, or at least that one is. There should be another white oak underneath of this black locust. We're gonna go digging around and see what we can find. Friends, I'll be honest, I did not find the white oak underneath this first black locust. It's possible it's hiding in there underneath of the grass. It was a very small plant to begin with, but it's also possible it got smothered out. You get the picture. Using an early successional fast-growing species like the black locust, this really just shows, 3 years old, this tree is massive. If you wanted to use it as a chop and drop plant, you could create some mulch, great forage for animals. It's fixing a lot of nitrogen in the soil, improving the soil and kind of moving things forward in succession. It's also casting some shade. So for example, this oak right here is not getting a ton of shade, but as this black locust continues to grow, it's going to cast some shade on that oak, which when it's really hot and dry could benefit the oak as the shade gets more dense. Like this black locust here, it might actually be too much shade. It could slow the oak down too much, which in which case, you implement some chop and drop, you free up some light and put some mulch on the ground. Some interesting things to point out here. We've got a red bud hanging out. I have no idea. It'd be cool to know if this red bud flowered this year. I guess I don't see any pods. I want to showcase a few things from this point of view here. First of all, we have some sunchokes right here, much shorter, the same age as that sunchoke patch over there. There's another little clump right here, another little clump here. This area is much drier. It gets much more sun. It's very exposed to the elements. And so even though these sunchokes are the same age, they are much smaller and less vibrant looking than this other patch over here. That said, they're still hanging on. There's also some hazelnuts in here moving along. You can see there is certainly some heat/drought stress on a lot of these plants. It's been dry here, at least best I can tell from checking the weather. Like I said, I haven't been here in a long time. I'm trying to think. It was certainly, all the trees were dormant last time I was here. It was probably February. So it has definitely been a long time. This hazelnut is growing pretty nicely. You can see here, put on at least 6 inches of growth so far this season. That's pretty good. It's another hazelnut tucked in right here. All right, so we're in the area that was going to be the garden. I did a good amount of gardening in here during 2022 and 2023. We set up this fence. It's plastic on top. There is some metal welded wire at the bottom. So it was intended to keep groundhogs, rabbits, deer away. Certainly some of these animals have found their way in, as I have not been here to really maintain the fence, but most of these plants are pretty free of any serious browse damage. Hazelnuts coming along very nicely. We'll see if we actually get any hazelnuts this year. I think next year most of these plants will be big enough to actually hopefully put on a crop. We might get a few nuts here this year. We'll see. The grass is really coming up hard and intense, but I think it's okay. Here we have an interesting, there was a bunch of kale and radish in here at one point. I obviously abandoned that a long time ago and have just let it return to grass. But this one kale plant survives, doesn't have significant bug damage, even though it's hot, and also did not flower, even though it went through a winter cycle. So this kale probably came from, I did plant a lot of seeds from perennial kale from the Experimental Farm Network. That's likely what that came from. If I can ever get it to flower, I'd like to get seeds off that guy. Here are some of my favorite friends in the food forest, these red-leafed peaches. I'm gonna see if we can step back and really get a good look at the color. So I'm tucked in here, a pretty profound feeling of actually sitting in the shade of a tree that I planted. This is really the first time I've experienced that in a real way. From this red leaf peach, you can see just how vibrantly dark the leaves are this time of year. They dull a little bit, they become a little bit more green in the growing season, but they maintain at least some level of red throughout the growing season. Spring and fall are when they have the most of this red color. And we'll talk, actually, we might get some peaches off this tree. We'll talk about in a minute. We've also got some Chickasaw plum seedlings stuck in here. Again, these are going into their second or third year. I guess the peaches are definitely on their third year. The Chickasaw plums, I think, are on their second. So kind of a little prunus thicket. There's another red leaf peach right here. You can see not quite as bushy and vibrant as this one here. And there's also additionally a hazelnut that I forgot about that I tucked in here. This hazelnut clearly being shaded out, but it might sucker and run out this way. The peaches, it's also a very questionable how long peaches will live in this environment. We get a lot of disease pressure in the hot and humid south. So the peaches may be somewhat of a temporary element. That's why I put these Chickasaw plums here, a prunus member that's much more adapted to the space. It's also able to sucker out and kind of claim space as these other species if they die off. You can see we do have some peaches here forming nicely. I can also tell that the plant dropped some peaches earlier in the season, so something's going on making this plant not happy. Now, right next to the peaches, a few years ago, I forget if this was 22 or 23, I dug up some blueberry suckers from a friend's field and transplanted them in here. Didn't really have time to give them a lot of mulch. You can see the grass is taken back over. Surprisingly, they're all still alive, and this one even has blueberries on it. So, you know, that's not a huge harvest, but for a plant that hasn't been watered or taken care of for the past 2 years, that's pretty cool. I'm very happy with that. This really gives you an idea how overgrown things are, though, walking through here. So in here, this was a bed of elderberry and willow that I planned on using as a propagation bed. I was going to dig these plants up in the winter. Never got around to it, so now they're getting very big. Probably I will dig some of them out this winter and leave some to kind of be remaining long-term in this landscape. The loose idea with this little garden area was to have not really straight, but sort of rows of shrubby perennials. We are under power lines here, so we can't have anything too tall. So we have a lot of hazelnuts, elderberry, peaches, prunus. There's a hazelnut right here doing particularly well. Interestingly, one right next to it not doing as well, not as happy, but still kicking along. Again, emphasis on, you know, none of these plants have really received any care. They definitely did not get any care from me in 2024 or 2025. So it's really cool to see plants like this hazelnut doing super well without any care. It's also encouraging to see that some of the hazelnuts are spreading. Like, this is not one that I planted. This is a sucker coming up from this right here, or perhaps from this guy right here. It's also a little bit scary in some ways looking at all the other plants that are volunteering, because it's going to become soon very difficult to walk through here between all the grasses, you know, wild but not native blackberries with all their thorns, the poison ivy, black walnut jumping up right there, the sweet gums, the cedars. You know, I didn't plant any of these cedars or sweet gums or anything like that. So overall, this site is definitely due for a workday coming down here to kind of clear up some of this vegetation, maintain pathways, at the least, maintaining some pathways through the kind of loosely shaped rows. Although I will say, as thorny as these blackberries are, it's looking like we're about to get a good blackberry harvest in here if we get some rain. There's things I didn't even notice. I was just walking past another blueberry that I planted in here. So yeah, you know, the downside to doing it this way, total neglect, totally, like, you know, not getting human interaction on a regular basis. The downside is that plants can get swallowed up by other plants. Another story of propagation beds kind of gone wrong. This is an Osage orange, which I was planning to dig up this winter. I would say this winter it was 2 feet tall or less. There was a bunch of them in here. You can see them now. And now they are almost as tall as I am, some of them anyway. So they're probably going to get dug up. They're right under the power lines. Really not a good place for these Osage oranges. So they'll need to get dug up, or they'll need to get coppiced back and used to produce mulch. That's really the plan with this box elder here, which showed up on its own, but I've allowed to grow. I chopped it back. Let's see if we can find it. I cut it back. Whoa, right here. Hold on. You can see where I cut it back last year in 2024. So at some point this year, not right now, we'll cut it here again. We'll cut most of these shoots. We'll maintain it at about shoulder height and use it as a mulching plant. There's a lot of different decisions you can make in managing a food forest. You know, you can say a plant like this that I don't want here, I could just dig it up. I could remove the roots, get it all the way out of here, or I can continually chop it, allow the root system to stay in the ground where they're contributing to positive direction in terms of soil health. I'm not here all the time. We don't need to 100% maximize this space to where every square inch is growing food. This is a native friend, native to this area. And while it's in the ground, you know, I can restrict its height by cutting and its roots are still exuding exudates into the soil, building up the soil microbiome, trending the soil, helping the soil trend in a better, more positive direction for a lot of the other species that we want to plant in here. Nice patch of yarrow going to flower. Part of what's so fun about making these videos in here in the food forest is that I can look back in time and say, wow, remember what this looked like back at, X point in time. Look how different it looks today. At one point, there was all sorts of collards and kale and sorghum and corn in here. Now, all of that is gone. But the hazelnuts, which were also there at that time, remain and have grown larger. This is probably the most well-established line of hazelnuts I have in this space. You can see they're filling out pretty nicely. Some of them almost as tall as I am. A lot of lamb's quarters coming up, which is a good summertime green and a native plant. Surprisingly, there are some strawberries in here. I planted some strawberries from a friend. This one was probably not fully ripe, but tastes pretty decent. Another one down in here. Again, pretty small. This patch is pretty neglected, probably wants water, but the strawberries are running throughout, moving around, making fruit, hanging out, doing their thing. It's actually more strawberries than I would have thought in here. A lot of folks will complain about Jerusalem artichoke and how aggressive it is at spreading. You can see if we don't plant anything, we get a sea of these raspberries. Look how thick this poison ivy is right here. If I step out so you can really see, my shadow's not blocking it. It just keeps going and going in this direction. Poison ivy, it is a native plant, but it's not doing much for humans, and it's actually very difficult for us to be around. Look at these sunchokes. Look how densely in year 3 they're sprouting back. Even after I did a really hard picking of tubers in here last fall. And look, it's continuing to spread this way, duking it out with the poison ivy. Boy, it's nice to get into the shade. One of the reasons I picked this spot, other than it being close to the well and the structures over there, was that it was nice to get afternoon shade from these 2 cedars. It's only one now. This one came down. I forget if that was late 23 or early 24, but she's down. And you can see even more sunchokes, even in the spot that gets afternoon shade. They're just as happy over here as they are in the sun. And again, we've got this line of more hazelnuts in here. That's really the theme. Rows of hazelnuts, handfuls of other plants, strawberries, sunchokes, some elderberry, willow, some friends who volunteered, some who I planted. The lamb's quarters all just came in on its own. Here's another nursery bed of Osage orange that I neglected to dig up. The shade is keeping them a little bit smaller than some of the beds over there. These will also likely get dug up this fall for real. Back in that bed of willow and elderberry, this is a willow cutting going into its 2nd season from a stick that was shoved into the ground. A lot of growth on here, no irrigation. If you've seen any of my previous videos about this food forest, you'll know that in the area behind this fence, all this grass and shrubbery you see in front of me, there are dozens and dozens of trees and shrubs planted into the ground here. I want to talk about a little group of plants here that I've talked about before. So first of all, we have a Chickasaw plum, struggling a little bit to make a home for itself in with all these grasses, but still chugging along. And if we pan over here just slightly to the right, there's a group of plants. They're much closer together than this Chickasaw plum is to them, but eventually, if they all survive, they're going to be in the same little grouping and guild right here. We have a propagation bed of black walnuts that, like the Osage orange, the willows, the elderberries, I didn't get down to dig them up this season like I had planned. I might still dig some of these up, in the off season, but these black walnuts, I'm more tempted to just leave, pick the strongest 1 or 2 to be a canopy, the overstory, as this grouping of plants grows up. I'm not sure. We'll see. There's different directions that we could go with that. We've got some irises or something that I actually found those in a leaf bag when I was collecting leaves and planted them, so we'll see what they do. Obviously, some blackberries, right, and some Virginia creeper coming in. We have a native persimmon right here. If we continue to walk around, we have a red maple. There's another red maple. There's a peach, just a domestic seedling peach. And there's also another Chickasaw plum right here. So there are a lot of canopy options for this planting. There's not as many understory options other than the Virginia creeper, the Chickasaw plum, which are going to be kind of lower, significantly lower than, a maple, a black walnut, a persimmon. But the loose goal is to, let this plum get nice and established. Let this peach do what it does. If the maples get in the way, we can chop them down. let the black walnuts, at least a few of them, get taller so that they can be the canopy eventually. As the peach dies off and the plums get more established, the plums will push out, sucker out, away from the shade of the black walnut. And that's kind of what we have here. The persimmon is another option. I think a persimmon is going to be a much more suited tree to be a long-term overstory member. We're kind of dry here. It's not the best site for black walnut. Persimmons seem to do a little bit better than black walnut here, but these seem happy, and I love black walnut, as you all know, so if they're willing to establish, I'm happy to have them. We also have over here, slightly removed from this guild, is the Amorpha fruticosa, the false indigo bush. Really nice plant. Again, kind of a plant that doesn't like it as dry as it is here, but we were able to get this one established, and it's doing its thing, putting out these little flowers the pollinators love. This is where, again, I used to have paths through here. Now I have no idea where they are. We could cut them again if we need to. There's a kind of sad-looking chestnut in here. Still alive, kicking along. Hopefully this guy makes it to maturity. There's a few chestnuts in here, but again, like everything else, neglected and being swamped by the grass. Would have been ideal if we could get some mulch on that one, but we'll see. Chance it might live. There's a little rabbit friend. There's a very, very healthy population of rabbits out here. Is one thing I will say. This is like rabbit heaven. So, more Chickasaw plums, putting on a lot of growth this year. These leaves are bigger than I feel like they've been in previous years, so that to me is a sign that they're actually starting to get more established and be happier. I wasn't able to make it down when they flowered, but I assume that they flowered because they did flower actually the year prior. We didn't get any fruits. They didn't all flower, so I think there was not enough pollination in order to generate fruits. Still no fruits that I'm seeing right now. The idea here with these Chickasaw plums, and this area you can see the grass is much thicker. There's very few, well, there's a little clump of sweet gums right here, but it's interesting how the sweet gums and cedars come and go in different areas. So the idea with the wild plums, the Chickasaw plums here in this patch, is that they'll kind of form a little archway that we can walk under, and they'll start to sucker and expand and fill in gaps. I'm really terrorizing this rabbit. Sorry, I happen to be going this way. You're running the way I want to go. So year 3 from transplanting the sucker, we actually are getting some fruit development this year. I think they developed 2 or 3 fruits total. Last year, this bush has about 10 on it. I haven't seen any on any of the others, but I think that these 2 bushes down here have some fruit as well. I can see some tinges of color. These are actually almost ripe, believe it or not, here in May. That one just fell off. This was actually almost ripe. I just tasted it. It's a little bit tart, but almost ripe, and there's a good viable seed in there. We'll go plant this. This gives you an idea how tall some of the grass and stuff is, almost up to my waist. I have no concept of time, so I don't know how much longer we have to be filming this video. Boy, it's nice in the shade. Here's one of the oldest pawpaws that I have in this grove. You can see doing pretty nice here, growing along. There's others tucked in. I'll go try to walk to a few of them. You can see another one over here. There's some in this little clump right in here. Another one right there. You guys get the idea. Pawpaw right in that cage. Pawpaw are one of those trees that like the black walnut and the false indigo bush. It's a little dry for them here. They're establishing well in areas that do get some shade, so I think there's hope for them yet, but definitely not the ideal species. We're kind of an upland, drier site here. I don't know if you can tell, I'm getting a little sweaty. It's definitely hot. And I don't really know how many more plants we're gonna have time to talk about. Let's see if I can show you guys. You guys can see how tall some of this vegetation is. You know, it's pretty tall. That's all right. The only hackberry I have planted is this guy right here, a friend gave to me. Continue to walk along. Some of the black walnuts I have that are actually doing all right. This one right here, there's about 4 or 5 of them. One right here. We have, this is actually a hickory that came from, it's a seedling of one of the named varieties of hickory. So I'm excited to see that guy still going along strong. You can see a big walnut here. And from here, without going into the sun, we can just do this fancy technology. Zoom in, there's a nice black walnut there, another black locust. I think you guys get the picture at this point. So what I try to get at in all these videos with this food forest is just that when you're planting hardy plants, plants that are either native or well adapted to your site, like we've talked about, some of the species I've selected are not super well adapted to the site, but a lot of them are. When you plant that way, and when you plant densely, on a low budget, you can get these plants establishing. It might not look ideal, but I'm putting almost no effort in at this point. And already it's producing some food. You know, I got a good handful of strawberries the one day this whole year that I've been here. Got this little handful of wild plums. Now I've seen plums from those trees, the parents of those trees, get a little bit bigger. I've also seen them ripen later in the year. I think the drought may be affecting some of those plums. They were like falling off the plant when I touched them. So typically that's a sign that they're ripe. I'm not certain that these were all the way there. There's one last thing I want to show y'all. That would be the Windbreak project that we started here a few years ago. Wanted to get a windbreak established on this fence line. Things are looking pretty good. So a lot of the earlier successional trees like this sycamore, like this maple, are doing pretty well. We also planted a lot of oaks and hickories, the slower growing, later successional species. Here's a hickory here. There's a little oak struggling right in here. I can see another hickory down in there. So a lot of those plants are struggling. Remember, this was super dense. There was a tree like every 6 inches. Now I see a white oak there, about a 3 or 4 foot gap. There's another oak that's been eaten real bad by some bugs. Another oak right here looking actually okay. Another maple. That's kind of the trend down here. So this is why I planted so densely. I knew that these plants were gonna have to fend for themselves and we were gonna have a high level of loss. Even though I want the later successional stuff like oaks, persimmons, hickory. There's another little oak right here. I knew that this soil was really in rough shape. It had been grass, cut about 1 inch tall. For years, for decades, it looked exactly like that out there. So the soil is rough. So I knew that the early successional species were going to be a more sure bet. Here's a willow oak, looking pretty good, next to another, I believe, white oak. So they're still here, very small, growing slowly, but surviving. And as you can see, the maples, they're earlier successional. They're just a little bit hardier in a situation like this. Box elder. The black locust doing exactly what you would expect, getting massive on a very short period of time. You know, both of these black locusts, under 3 years old, taller than I am. Little Osage orange actually doing pretty well here at the end of this windbreak line, along with another white oak here. There we are. Anyway, I'd love to hear from you folks. What else you guys want to see at this food forest? What questions you might have? What do you think? How do you feel about how it's changed over the past few years from what you've been able to see on these videos? For me, it's just pretty fun to come down here and see trees taller than I am that I planted. And like I said, it's really the first time that I've gotten to experience that. Trees that I planted that are taller than me, casting shade, moving the ecological succession of plants forward, moving the ecological succession in the soil forward. Really, the system's taken on a life of its own at this point. It had a life of its own before I got here. I got to make some decisions, steer it towards a certain direction, and now I'm pretty hands-off. I had a lot of nerves, a lot of angst about leaving all of these plants when I left last year. I was concerned that they might not be hardy enough, established enough to keep going and kicking without me here to do watering, to add mulch, to add compost. So I'm thrilled that everyone is, for the most part, still alive and kicking. And also it's worked out, you know. Virginia is really a place that I'm wanting to call home. Figure we'll end it with this, you know. This place, these plants, it is really important to me. It's first of all, it's beautiful down here. Cedar Grove, North Carolina, it's beautiful. It's also meaningful for me. Let me try to keep the camera steadier here. It's really meaningful for me, you know, that my family, my relatives grew up here. There's a deep connection to land and to these plants. I'm grateful for the opportunities I had here in Cedar Grove. All the stuff that these plants taught me in implementing this food forest. But I gotta say, the past 3 years between being here and also spending a year in Virginia have really taught me that North Carolina is probably not my forever home. As much as it means to me, as beautiful as it is, I don't feel at home here. I really do feel at home in Virginia, southwestern Virginia, up in the mountains where I'm at now. Feels really good. And luckily it's still close enough that I can visit, still be a part of this landscape. So it's been a good transition, I guess is what I'm trying to say. This food forest has helped me transition out of my previous life into my current role with plants and nursery work and all that comes along with that. And it's also helped transplant me from Pennsylvania, you know, to Cedar Grove, now to Virginia. These plants have similarly been transplanted and are going through a transformation in this landscape. As it goes, you know, everything changes. And I think I'll just leave you guys with that because this video is probably super long at this point. I got to get packed up and actually get back home to Virginia. So catch you later.